guys, good morning. I'm going to do just a little talk about some saws today. So we'll start off with the hard point saw. It's a general use saw, mostly for first fix carpentry, for example for cutting stud work, or you would use this when you're cutting a roof. It's called a hard point because the tips of the actual teeth are put under very extreme heat. That then hardens the metal, which makes the tip stay sharper for much longer. Unfortunately with these, you cannot sharpen them. Once they're blunt, they're no good, you just throw it away, or maybe use it for cut plasterboard, things like that. But once the sharpness is gone, you have to throw them away. Unlike the old-fashioned saw like this you could actually put into a vise, reset the teeth, which actually means positioning the teeth in their correct position, and actually take a file and sharpen each individual tooth. That is a very old way of doing things. These saws are much sharper, but like I said, unfortunately they don't last. The sharpness doesn't last forever. So that's basically general use saw. So then we'll go on to the tenon saw. Tenon saw has this quite heavy piece of metal on the top. That is there to basically keep the saw blade as straight as possible, because when you're ripping down the edge of a tenon, you want this saw to stay nice and flat and straight. The teeth are much smaller than the hard point saw. The reason for that is it's for much finer work. You're using this more for joinery, cabinet making, so the teeth want to be much smaller so that it's not so much of a rough cut. So that's the tenon saw. Then we'll go on to the coping saw. The coping saw has an adjustable blade where you can adjust that to any angle you want. Predominantly used obviously for cutting anything that isn't straight. So for example, you would use it a lot on skirting, where you need to cut a scribe on the top of the skirting. The coping saw is the tool that you're going to need for that. Again, very, very small teeth, and obviously a very, very small blade, so that allows it to be able to turn, whereas the other saws, you can't twist and turn that like you can with a much smaller blade. You can have the blade either way round, but the best way for most applications is to have the teeth actually facing you when you have the handle this way, so you're actually doing an upcut. That's generally the best way to use it. Then we'll go on to, we call it a gentleman saw. Again, this is a very, very fine blade, predominantly for cabinet making, very, very fine work, cutting cut dovetails. There is almost no set on this saw, so you can run your thumb along the edge here and you can feel that the blade is actually the same width as the actual teeth, whereas the other saws there is a set, so that the actual tooth of the saw sticks out from the flatness of the blade. The reason for that is so that you can get right up close to the edge of the timber, so you could lay the saw flat against the timber and it's not going to affect anything on here. For example, maybe you're cutting the end of a dowel, you can push the saw right against the edge and you won't actually scratch or cut into the side here. So the hard point saw, generally used for first fix carpentry. We want to use this saw on this type of timber. This is stud work material. You see that it's quite, we call it quite a woolly wood, where the grain is not so tight together. It's a lower quality grade timber, but perfectly good enough for stud work or roofing. Now normally what you would do is you'd actually get your knee up onto the sawhorse here, onto your wood, to hold it in place, but I can't get my knee up there, so there'd be terrible seams. So I'm going to clamp it to the actual, to the sawhorse. Okay, hold it in place. So with this much longer saw, again, we're always starting on that far corner, always starting with a back cut, just get that groove there, and then we can then slowly push away. And I am looking at this line down here first. Getting that cut down to there, and then I will bring the handle back. Again, letting the saw do the work. I've got my body in line behind the saw blade, as straight as possible, my elbow straight behind it, so that the saw isn't going off at an angle. And then we just slowly work our way across. So I've got that down to that line. I've got another line marked on the back. I will then keep the saw in the groove I've already cut. Slowly dropping the handle down. When I come to the very far corner, what I want to do is actually slightly upcut on that so it stops it from splitting out. So I'll get to there, and then I will drop the handle right down. And now I'm cutting up. That gives us a nice crisp cut, nice and square. Okay, so we've got a nice square cut. So again, this saw has multiple uses. Cutting sheets of plywood, it's very good for that as well. But yeah, that's it with the hardpoint saw. So with the tenon saw, this is ideal for ripping down with the grain of the timber. Because of the blade being slightly stiffer, it holds straight much easier. So for example, on this application, cutting this tenon, I can get my thumb right up against the side here, slowly start. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking down the blade, and I am focusing on this line here and this line at the same time. And I've got the timber tilted over at a slight angle so that the saw is actually cutting less timber than it needs to. If you're cutting flat down like this, you're cutting in more timber. It makes it harder work. Harder work makes the saw bend, so you want to keep it as smooth as possible and to make it easy for yourself in general anyway. So with this, we can flip down, just letting the saw do the work. So I've got to that point now. Now I'll angle the saw slightly back, dropping the handle as I go.
Loud noises!
All the way to my shoulder line, and then I would then flip over, and do the same again, keeping the saw in the groove that I've already cut on the other side. Down to my line again, and then final cut, I will position it flat and just finish that cut in the middle. Okay, so tenon saw, ideal for ripping, and also because of the small teeth, we can then also do our cross cut. So when we come to cross cutting, we want to start on the far corner, getting the saw onto the waist side of the line, and then just slowly pulling back just to make a small saw cut to start. Do that once more, and that gives you a nice start position, and then slowly work your way back across this line, keeping your body in line with the saw, shoulder behind the saw. And then I'm just going to slowly drop the handle, try not to cut on the far side. I'm only cutting on the top and this side, so I can make sure that I'm keeping my saw nice and straight. Dropping the handle, all the way down, and then I can then bring the saw up straight, and I can run the saw in the cut I've already done, so then the other side should be nice and straight as well. So I'm hardly putting any effort in at all, just letting the saw cut through. And as you get to the end, you can hear the note change. And we're through. Okay? So that gives a nice, try and get that on camera, get that a nice fine cut, beautifully straight. And yeah, so that's it for the tenon saw. So with the coping saw, I've got the blade set so the teeth are pointing back this way. That allows me to then do an upcut. So what we do, coping saw, it can go right on this very edge and just slowly start it. And having that upcut gives me much more control over the saw. And as you can hopefully see, I'm able to maneuver the saw blade to curve around where I need to. The rest of that cut would be done with a tenon saw. So that allows us to make a cut like this. So we're able to curve that all the way around, so then that then would then fit onto the skirting. Okay, so next we'll go on to the dovetail saw. Like I said, very, very fine teeth. It's there for a purpose to cut very, very accurately. Like I said, for maybe for a dovetail. Got a piece of hardwood here. Got some dovetails marked out. Now this cut here, this has been cut with a tenon saw. So I just want to show you the difference between cutting with a tenon saw and cutting with the dovetail saw. So we'll pop that in the vise just above so it doesn't vibrate. And then we're gonna, instead of starting on the far corner, what I want to do, because I want to follow this angle down, I'm actually going to start flat. So I'm going to keep the saw at that angle and going across the top of the wood here, across the end grain, to keep that square. So I'll just slowly come in, keeping the saw nice and straight, just pushing back and forth nice and gently. Okay, so I'll just come down to the shoulder line, and you can see, hopefully you can see the difference between the two cuts, where this side much smaller cut and also much straighter and not so chatted out because of the tenon saw. So we would use that for fine cabinet making, for fine furniture. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this little video on some information about some different saws you're going to use. Most important thing for all of them is to take your time, let the saw do the work. Don't try and force the saw to go in a position it doesn't want to go in. All that does is then messes up your cut. Hopefully you got some information from that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.